So I'm Adam and I work at the Woodland Trust. I'm going to be loosely chairing tonight. You'll hear from our great speakers in a couple of minutes. So Paul, I think I've let everybody in who's in the waiting room, so I think you're probably good to go now.
Well, thank you. I'm Paul Wood, and I'm one of the volunteers for the Urban Tree Festival. The Urban Tree Festival is in its 6th year this year, and we have a packed program. Hopefully, many of you will be able to join other events as well. We've got some more online events coming up, and we have live events across London, Birmingham, Plymouth, Brighton, Edinburgh, and hopefully in the future, other towns and cities too. But this evening, we're very pleased to have this Zoom event, which is about tree equity. We've got some great speakers, and I think that's about all I can say about it. But welcome to the Urban Tree Festival. Hope you enjoy this evening's event. Do look at the rest of our programme, and we hope to see some of you at other events too. So back to you, Adam.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. So just to note that we're using Zoom meetings functionality. So just make sure you're on mute if that's okay, just to avoid any kind of background noise for people. So this is an evening of talks about tree equity. So this has been sort of initiated by a project that the Woodland Trust has been running to develop a tree equity score for the UK. So this has adapted a system from the US, which is all about measuring the benefits of trees to people in urban areas and looking at inequalities in urban tree cover. So we're going to explore that through 3 different speakers. So some of you might have been to some of the webinars and events that we've run about the tree equity score over the past 6 months. So this was launched in December. A little bit later on, I'll put a link in the chat to the tree equity score website. We're not going to do a sort of demonstration tonight, but we might refer to it sort of once or twice. But it's an interactive map that produces a score for pretty much every urban neighbourhood in the UK. So 34,000 neighbourhoods, score out of 100, which is about their tree equity, how well served that neighbourhood is by the benefits of trees. And it combines tree canopy data from Google with information on surface temperature, air quality, health, age, income, employment, and combines all that information to provide a measure of tree equity, which is, as I said, about how well served that neighbourhood is by the benefits of trees. So this has been a really fascinating project to work on over the past year, and it's really kind of kicked off a whole new, well, like an era of insight, really, in terms of those inequalities in urban tree cover. Now, you'll hear from our speakers today. This is not a new story, you know, that we've known about areas that are sort of more leafy and green in cities and less so. But this is helping us look at it at a national level and start to look at that idea of standards of urban tree cover and what good looks like and what inadequate looks like as well, very importantly. So we're going to get into all that over the next hour and a half. 3 great speakers. We're going to start with Mark Johnston in a minute. I'm going to let each speaker kind of introduce themselves. Mark's a tree expert, been working in the world of trees for a full career, published books. Mark will tell you about all of this in a minute. And then pass to Beth Collier. So Beth is going to look at the idea of tree equity through the lens of environmental justice. Beth has worked as an advisor on the Tree Equity Score project over the past year, and it's been brilliant collaborating with Beth, and we've got more work ahead. And then we're going to finish with a presentation by Katie Hawkins. Katie is the engagement officer for Birmingham Tree People. That's one of the leading community forestry organisations in the UK, doing some really cutting edge, fabulous work in Birmingham that Katie will talk to you about. And Katie's also running a walk on Thursday as part of the Urban Tree Festival in Birmingham. So we'll crack on. So I'm going to share your slides now, Mark. So I'm just going to, if everyone just bears with me while I do that for a minute. We'll also have some time for some Q&A at the end. So if there's questions, pop them in the chat and we'll try and keep track of those. And I will just load up your slides, Mark. Hopefully everybody can see that. Hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah. Okay. Right. So Mark, if you just say next slide and I'll just move them along.
That's great. That's great, Adam. Many thanks for that. Good evening, everyone, and greetings from Belfast. It's great to be asked to do this little talk this evening, and many thanks to Adam and his colleagues at the Woodland Trust. And also a big thank you to Paul Wood and his colleagues at the Urban Tree Festival. It's a wonderful thing, this Urban Tree Festival, and I think this is my third contribution to my third festival, I think. Something that I think everyone should be supporting, and it's doing great work. So I've been asked to give a talk on tree equity from a personal and historical perspective. And this is actually quite timely for me because I'm just about to publish my autobiography, which is an account of 50 years in the tree world. I was a late starter as well. And it's all about the people and projects I've worked with. But one of the recurrent themes of my whole career has been this topic of tree equity, although, of course, in those early days, we didn't call it that. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Yeah. Okay, Mark. So I'm just trying to get there. It's not. There we go.
We'll be talking a lot about the urban forest, and just for those people who are perhaps not familiar with that term, I just want to explain. I'm not going to get into technical definitions, but the urban forest is quite simply all the trees and woodlands in and around an urban area. And for those of you that are familiar with Belfast, you'll recognise this as Belfast's urban forest with the two yellow Harland and Wolff cranes in the background there. But Belfast's urban forest is fairly typical. Maybe a lot of trees in the suburban areas, not so much in the industrial areas, and also the general pattern of greater tree cover in those wealthy middle class areas and somewhat less in the working class areas. Now, ever since we've had trees in towns and cities, we've had to manage them in some sort of way. And for hundreds of years, this was literally a kind of unplanned reactive approach. But then along came something called urban forestry in the 1960s, which was a radical new approach, which emphasized a planned, systematic and integrated approach to the management of the whole urban forest resource. And the term was actually coined by a Canadian guy, Eric Jurgensen, at the University of Toronto in 1965. And yes, now many tree officers today can still only aspire to managing in a proper urban forestry planned management way, mainly because of lack of resources, not because they don't know how to do it. Next slide. So the urban forestry movement started to really get going in the early 1970s. In 1971, we had this wonderful conference, Trees and Forests in an Urbanizing Environment. But interestingly enough, it wasn't actually called urban forestry in that context. They referred to urban-related environmental forestry. And it was probably only until the sort of mid-1970s that the term started to come into general use. And here was a wonderful proceedings of a wonderful conference edited by John Andreessen at the University of Toronto. John succeeded Eric Jurgensen and was probably the man who inspired me most in terms of the whole idea of urban forestry, because he was very much emphasizing the social science aspects of it rather than just being about trees. And so I first heard about urban forestry, believe it or not, in 1976, when I was a student studying arboriculture at Wood College in Surrey. And in 1978, I contacted both Eric Jurgensen and John Andreessen, and reached out to them and started, certainly with, as far as John Andreessen is concerned, a very long correspondence that went on for many years. Next slide. Not only was I learning a lot from the North American people on urban forestry, I was also learning a lot in terms of my own work. I became a tree officer at the London Borough of Harrow in 1977. That was very interesting. Not many challenges from a social science point of view. But when I moved to the London Borough of Wandsworth in 1979, this really sent me up the learning curve very rapidly. It was one of the largest tree sections in Britain at the time, and it was an inner city area of London. When I arrived, much of the planting program for the coming planting season had been decided, but there was still a little bit of money in my budget for planting on local authority housing estates. So one of my first jobs was to do a tour of some of these estates, and it was mainly in Battersea. Well, as you can see, these are the typical local authority housing estates, and the housing estates themselves, the flats were in pretty poor condition. You had damp, and you had the lifts that didn't work, and there were high levels of crime and antisocial behavior. But these people, they also didn't have any gardens. And what was provided instead was what was politely called communal open space, which, as you can see, this is typical. It was just mown grass, hardly any vegetation to speak of. So thinking about, you know, the whole idea of tree equity, I suppose, although we didn't call it that, I thought, let's plant some trees for these people. So that's what I instructed my tree maintenance unit to do. And on about 3 of these estates, we planted 25, 30 trees each. Now, I didn't expect people to be writing me letters of thanks or phoning up and saying what a wonderful job, but I was quite surprised by the reaction. My supervisor came to see me a week later, and he said, "I've got some bad news for you, Mark. Most of those trees have been vandalized." And I was quite shocked by that. It made me think. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that you just can't steam into these areas and plant trees and expect people to be grateful. Certainly in terms of their priorities, trees were not very high on their list of priorities. And maybe they weren't aware of, you know, many of the benefits of trees. So it gave a whole new meaning to that concept of ground preparation in advance of planting. And I started to develop my own ideas on the whole concept of community involvement and developing strategies of education, consultation, and practical participation. Next slide. So I started to publish one of my first papers, Community Forestry, a Sociological Approach to Urban Forestry. And I was looking at the people aspects of our work. And this, I'm pleased to say, as quite often quoted, "The aim of urban forestry is to improve the welfare of urban residents. The planting and care of trees is a means to that end, not an end in itself." So really, although, you know, we're about trees, we're really about people. And what essentially attracted me to the whole urban forestry thing was that it was urban tree management with a social conscience. It was about making lives better for people. So, as I say, I've continued to publish throughout my career. Next slide. After a while, I got involved in developing a load of citywide projects, community-based citywide projects. And the first one that we did was the Forest of London project. And I have to give recognition that I was partly inspired by the work of tree people in Los Angeles. I'd connected with Andy and Katie Lipkiss of Tree People. And when we met up in London, Andy said to me, maybe you could do a similar project in London. And well, it's a long story, but we did. It took a while to build up the partnership of local authorities and voluntary organisations, and we launched it in '87. It got a bit blown off course because we, don't forget, 3 weeks after we launched it, we had the hurricane of '87, and our role somewhat changed. But the most important thing maybe that came out of the Forest of London project was a whole load of projects that were modelled on the Forest of London idea. And I won't talk a lot about those, but I'll mention just a few. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I should mention the aims of the Forest of London that was essential here. And we're talking about getting Londoners more aware of their trees and promoting community involvement. But look at the top there. The first major aim, to get Londoners working together to plant trees where they are most needed. That was very important to us. Next slide. So the first project to come out of the Forest of London was in Dublin, believe it or not, and it was the Crann Síochána project, launched by the Irish Taoiseach, Irish Prime Minister, in 1987. Next slide. Then we went on and we developed the Forest of Cardiff project, Coedwig Caerdydd, launched in 1988. Again, partnership of local authorities, voluntary organisations, a huge amount of really good work done in the Forest of Cardiff project. Next. Treewise in Glasgow. This, I really did enjoy setting up this with my colleagues. My grandfather was from Glasgow, and what we did was we developed a training and woodland management kind of project. We took young unemployed people off of the dole queues and we trained them up in forestry and arboricultural skills, and at the same time greening some of the most dilapidated estates in Glasgow with woodland type planting. Very satisfying work, that. Next slide. I was also starting to make many more connections with our American and North American colleagues. I actually had the honor of going over to America in 1989 to speak at the 4th American Urban Forestry Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. And I was invited there by American Forests. They were actually called the American Forestry Association then, but soon later changed their name to American Forests. And I linked up with a lot of the guys there, and throughout the 1990s, we did a lot of work together, and I had the privilege of working with some of the leading lights and regarding them as my friends, people like Neil Sampson, Gary Moll, Deborah Gangloff, and Phil Rodbell. Absolutely amazing what was going on with American Forest then. And a couple of years later, I also spoke at their conference in Los Angeles, which was another wonderful experience. Next. So then I got round to doing my last citywide project, and this was the Forest of Belfast project. Now, of all the various citywide urban forestry projects that I've been involved with, this was certainly the most challenging, but in many respects, the most satisfying. You have to remember that in the early 90s, the Troubles were still raging. It was very much a divided city, and security issues were a major consideration as large parts of the city were effectively a war zone. I would love to talk to you a lot about the Forest of Belfast, but there's an entire chapter in my autobiography, which I think many of you will find fascinating reading. Next slide. What I want to focus on more is the fact that long term, I wanted to develop a tree strategy for Belfast. But to begin with, we had to do a tree survey. You can't really have a tree strategy without doing a tree survey first. So we, believe it or not, we actually did this off of aerial photography. We weren't blessed with the wonderful things like iTree that we have now. We literally worked manually off aerial photography. And you can see the various different areas of Belfast, quite varied, but tree cover in East Belfast, they're nearly 17%. but central areas much less. So it was very interesting from my point of view that I also was able to see, having got to know Belfast very well, how tree cover actually followed socio-economic lines as well. The poorer areas quite clearly had a lot less tree cover. Next slide. That actually persists to this day. We are blessed with having a really excellent tree officer here in Belfast, Alan McHaffey, who has been there right at the start and will soon be retiring after a long and distinguished career. Alan made it his business to plant trees in some of the poorer areas, but obviously we've still got a lot of work to do. This is East Belfast. This is Cypress Avenue, made famous by the song of that name by Van Morrison. And it's in a very well-to-do part of East Belfast. Next slide. But contrast that with another area of East Belfast, and not untypical of some around the city, not a tree in sight. So you can see, you know, we have plenty of work to do. Next slide. But I'm grateful, hugely grateful, that we now have this thing called the Tree Equity Score. And it's, you know, largely down to those guys at American Forests. So my hat goes off to them. And we've also now, you'll hear more about it, we've got a UK version of this. And this is basically, you know, a tool for identifying those areas of greatest priority in terms of tree cover. So you can establish, you know, what is the current canopy cover. You can look at what you want as a canopy cover, say 30%, and then you look at the priority. And in terms of devising what is the priority, a number of factors, which Adam briefly mentioned earlier, come into play. And some of those are governed by what we call the indices of multiple deprivation. These are socio-economic factors such as income, housing, various social and economic factors. But yes, we now have the Tree Equity Score, and we now have a UK Tree Equity Score. Next slide. And I'm really delighted that we also now here in Belfast have a tree strategy. And it's a really excellent example of a tree strategy. But most of all, I'm proud that the whole principle of tree equity has been built into this tree strategy, so that people like Alan now have something that they can use as a tool, not just, you know, planting where they think, you know, it should go. This will be driven by policy, and it's a huge step forward. Next slide. And bearing in mind, you know, what Belfast has been doing, when we launched the UK Tree Equity Score, we actually started off the launch here in Belfast, and it was a wonderful day. And colleagues from American Forest came over, and here's Mustaq Ali and Chris David from American Forests. And it was a wonderful occasion to kick off this really excellent tool, the UK Tree Equity Score. And I was honoured to be one of the keynote speakers for this. And I was delighted by that, because it gave recognition to some of the earlier work that I'd done on tree equity. And I'm not just talking about what I've already mentioned. Next slide. Some of you, or many of you indeed, may be aware of the study that was done, Trees in Towns 2. This was the huge government report that I had the privilege of leading, and on urban tree management in England. It was researched in 2004 to 6 and published in 2008. But here, for the first time, we actually took the indices of multiple deprivation and correlated it with the tree data. And it was a first tentative step towards this, you know, whole idea of tree equity. And it's a 650-page report, and you'll see the start of our work on this particular tree equity issue. I think it's page 381. But yes, I was delighted that, you know, recognition was given to us for the work that we had done on that. Next slide.
We've got about 5 minutes, Mark.
That's great. That's perfect. Also, I got recognition for the work that I'd done in a historical context. In 2017, I published a book, Street Trees in Britain, a History. This was as a result of a lot of original research, and we identified that extensive tree inequity was very evident from the earliest days of our street tree plantings. That the wealthiest areas often had, you know, planes and horse chestnuts, and the middle class areas, lower middle class areas, acacias and laburnums, and the working class areas, nothing at all usually. And it was absolutely fascinating. Next slide. But we also notice how tree equity can change over time. And this is just one example. This is Cannon Hill Road in Birmingham in 1910. And at the time, it was a fairly suburban area, middle class area, and the street trees had just been planted. Next slide. This is the same street in 2020. The whole character of the area has changed. It's now more of an inner city area. It's certainly working class, much poorer. And hey, look what's happened. Most of the trees have disappeared. And this was a pattern that I found, particularly doing a detailed study of Manchester and Birmingham, but I also found in other cities. So bear in mind that this whole thing can change over time. Next slide. So just to finish off now, I just want to put this in a global context and also to look ahead at how tree equity has a relevance all around the world. I've been very fortunate that my work has taken me to many different countries around the world, and I've seen that pattern of tree inequity. Lots of trees in wealthy areas and very few trees in the poorer areas. And this is just one example from South Africa. This is the beautiful university town of Stellenbosch, not far from Cape Town. And these are English oaks actually just coming into leaf in a very expensive part of Stellenbosch. Lovely, really beautiful. And contrast that with the next slide. This is the township of Soweto in Johannesburg. I spent 2 days there talking to the city council people and learning all about urban forestry as best they could in a completely different context. So imagine, you know, living there. It's pretty grim, and there's not much more that I can tell you about that. Next slide. So that's it, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. I can only say tree equity, the whole idea of tree equity and the tree equity score has a big future. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. That was a really wonderful tour through all the insights you've gained over your long career in arboriculture. I was just reflecting, really. I always like it when I see somebody who's got tree in their email address. I think that says a lot about you, and it's always a good sign in my experience.
Thank you.
Fab, we will come, you know, we'll have time for some questions at the end. So I think if people have, you know, if there's things you'd like to ask Mark, do pop them in the chat, and you can go on and you can read, you know, I've read the Trees and Towns report. You can find it online. There is a PDF somewhere on the internet of it.
Yes, and you can also get hard copies if you contact. Actually, there's a print-on-demand website called lulu.com. You can get hard copies of the Trees in Towns report, which is so much easier to read, and they're actually quite cheap.
Great. Okay, so thank you so much for kicking us off, Mark. We're now going to pass over to Beth Collier. So Beth is the director at Wild in the City, and I will let Beth tell you a little bit more about herself, and she will start her presentation shortly. So over to you, Beth.
Thank you. And thank you, Mark, for that wonderful history, your personal history in tree equity, but also just the movement in general. It's always really important to see the legacy that the work we're doing now is part of. So thank you. It was really fascinating. Thanks also to Adam and the Woodland Trust for inviting me to come and speak to you today about tree equity and environmental justice. I've been joining Adam on this really exciting journey of looking at tree equity in the UK context, and in particular looking at the correlations between tree canopy cover and race and ethnicity. My name is Beth Collier. By training, I'm a nature-allied psychotherapist, and I also teach natural history and woodland living skills. And I run Wild in the City. I'm going to share a little bit with you about our organisation before going on to look at the research work that we're doing around the issue of tree equity. So Wild in the City support people of colour in finding their place in the British countryside and nurturing their relationship with nature and the natural world. And we're really delighted to have celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, building community in nature. So as an organisation, we're building a community for people who may have not had formative early experience of spending a lot of time in nature, or people for whom nature's felt a bit out of reach. Amongst a lot of the people we work with, people have been made to feel they don't belong in nature and the natural world. So a lot of what we're doing is creating spaces for people to feel safe and comfortable to explore, learn about the natural world, but also to do so with the company of other like-minded people. So our programs include natural history, learning about wildlife, the flora and fauna in urban habitats, but also in open countryside throughout the country. We also teach bushcraft and woodland living skills, learning how to live in harmony with our natural surroundings. More importantly, understanding how our ancestors would have viewed natural spaces and psychologically what that can shift in us when we have an understanding and a respect for nature and resources as our ancestors would have done. We also lead hikes into open countryside. It's wonderful to introduce people to habitats and terrains that they've never been to before, and to provide that sense of community for people to enjoy spaces that have felt previously out of reach. I'm just admitting a few people. We also offer ecotherapy. So as a psychotherapist, the modality I practice is called nature-allied psychotherapy. In addition to exploring our human social relationships, so your relationship with your mum, your brother, your work colleagues, nature-allied psychotherapy provides the opportunity to explore relationship with nature and the natural world as a significant other in our life. Our connection or sense of disconnect with nature has a real impact on our sense of being, because we are part of nature. If we're not connected to nature, we're not going to be connected to a part of ourselves. So we have a lot of programs that are typically around the fire, under the canopy of a tree, exploring our relationship, our feelings about the natural world, but also our formative experience, our family culture related to nature and the natural world, whether nature was a part of our life as a child, whether it wasn't, and the impact that that's had on us. So a lot of the work can be very reparative, restoring and repairing and rediscovering relationship with nature. We also have research programs. We've been one of the first organisations to explore people of colour's relationship with nature and the natural world in the UK. Within the environmental sector, it's widely accepted that people of colour are less present within nature engagement programmes and within natural settings. And this is in sharp contrast to our relationship with nature in countries of heritage, where we're often deeply connected to nature and the natural world. So something has happened on migration to the West that has caused a disconnect. And our ethnographic research has shown or thrown up the issue of racism and hostility, whether that's the perception of fear or the direct experience of race and racism. there are a lot of issues that impact on how safe people feel, from historical messages from elders in our community who experienced hostility in gathering in cities and trying to establish a life on migration. Think of the signs, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, who may have passed down the message, don't go, it's not safe, it's not for us, intending that to be protective because of their own experiences of violence in cities. Or the historical messaging of colonialism and slavery, which told us we were backwards for being connected with nature. So there being a sense of shame in having connection, which is in sharp contrast to a white middle class typical experience of nature, where being connected is a sign of being productive, of healthy leisure time. It's another talk to go into all the different reasons, the different messages that can lead to people feeling they don't belong and they don't fit in. But as a snapshot, there are two different streams. One is how we've been made to feel by others, by white others, when we're in the setting, or historically, messages we pick up through society about our place, where we do and don't fit. But also internally, we internalize myths about ourselves, about what is safe. But also some of the myths we internalize, that we don't swim, we don't wear wellies, we don't camp, are a way of protecting ourselves from the pain of a loss. There's a rupture in being disconnected to nature that's painful. So there's a way of coping with that, but sometimes is about dismissing nature and the natural world, to say, I didn't want to go, it's boring, it's dirty, I didn't want to go there anyway. And this sort of avoidant, dismissive way of coping is exactly that. It's coping in response to something that's been stressful or intimidating or has been lost. So why focus on people of colour? So I've already touched on some of the historical reasons why people of colour can often be made to feel that we don't belong in nature and natural settings, to the extent where we're less present than white people in the UK in nature. But in addition to that, there's also issues around the disparity in access to the benefits that nature brings us, all these wonderful things that it does for our well-being, elevating our mood, reducing stress, anxiety, and depression. But also when we look at where the different demographics of populations live in the UK, over 83% of us are in cities, but over 98% of Black people live in cities. And the areas we live in are typically areas with a higher deficiency of access to nature and the natural world. And we live in closer proximity to the city stresses, air pollution, noise pollution, urban heat island effect. So it's particularly important as a demographic that people feel they have the knowledge, the skills, and the sense of entitlement to enjoy being in nature and natural spaces. We're also much less likely to live within 10 minutes of a nature spot close to our home. So considering these city stresses, these are talking about our relationship in urban areas to nature in general, rather than specifics of trees, which I'm going to go on to shortly. But there's a correlation. And what we want to get to is a rigorous scientific evidence base, looking not just at correlation, but really interrogating this relationship between tree canopy cover and race, in the way we can point to it in terms of city stresses and race and ethnicity. So Mark's given a wonderful overview of the tree equity score, which was developed by American forests, which maps who does and who doesn't have trees near to where they live. And it's had an extraordinary impact in the US in really empowering communities to plant trees. In the US, the picture of disparity in who lives closer to trees on the first look compared to UK evidence is much greater. There was a practice of redlining in the States, which governed who could get mortgages, that people of colour were discriminated against in access to finance. And this led to a real division in areas alongside Jim Crow and all sorts of other racist policies of distinct areas based on ethnicity. And in the US, there's a 38% disparity in areas where people of colour live, largely Black people, and where white people live, which is a huge difference, 38% difference in tree canopy cover, and all the benefits that tree canopy gives in lowering cities, having cleaner air, sense of well-being, and also the correlations that there are with people that live closer to trees have higher economic and educational prospects. There's a large body of research on tree canopy cover and environmental justice and race and ethnicity in the UK, partly because there's such a clear evidence base for the disparity, but also because the environmental movement has mapped onto the civil rights movement, perhaps in a way that hasn't been as prominent in the UK, although we must acknowledge that it's been here in the UK, but perhaps not as well funded and well promoted. So if we have a look now at the UK situation with regards to the tree equity score, so the American forests at the Woodland Trust and Sustainable Healthcare, Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, looked at adapting the methodology to fit the UK situation, the UK circumstances. So looking at the data pools that were available to draw from and looking at the socioeconomic factors and whether they shared relevancy with the American data set criteria. And they produced this wonderful free tool that we can all use to look up our postcode, look up our local area, and see what our tree equity score is. What it also shows is that in the UK, the relationship between tree canopy cover and ethnicity is under-researched. It isn't yet clear what the disparity levels are, although it is clear that there's a trend towards there being less tree canopy cover in areas where there are people of colour. But at the moment, it is just a not particularly rigorous initial view of the data and early exploration. The closest research prior to the tree equity score methodology was some research by Friends of the Earth that showed when you look at populations or neighborhoods with the lowest numbers of people of color contrasted with populations with the highest numbers of people of color, you could find that there was between a 3.2% and 4.2% disparity in terms of the levels of tree canopy cover. But again, it was averaging out neighborhoods across the UK. But when you zoom into the local level, you can get a different picture. So what we can say for sure, as I was just saying, is that areas that are more diverse, there is less tree canopy cover, but that's sort of a very generalistic headline. And the initial data exploration at the UK level and not the county or city level or the local neighbourhoods level is that neighbourhoods with more or less than 50% minoritized ethnic groups in the areas with a majority of white neighbourhoods, they had on average a 16.9% greater canopy cover than the neighbourhoods with more than 50% minoritised ethnic groups. But this sample size was very unbalanced. You can see a lot more neighbourhoods were used where there is majority white ethnic groups. So in order to address this knowledge gap, the Woodland Trust is coming together with the University of Exeter and also ourselves at Wild in the City to do some primary peer-reviewed research to interrogate the data further and to do some peer-reviewed research looking at the protected characteristics, so not just race and ethnicity, but widening that out, looking at what is the picture in terms of relationship between these groups and tree canopy cover. And we're really hoping to kickstart much greater interest in providing an evidence base in the UK in the same way as we find in the States. I want to present a case study looking at a local level situation, and I've chosen Croydon, it's the borough where I'm based. And when we look at the wider lens of deficiency of access to nature, so not just tree canopy cover at the local level, we can see some really stark differences. So the borough of Croydon is 52% minority ethnic people, and there's a huge divide between the north and the south of the borough. In the northwest of the borough, it's predominantly 70% people of colour, whereas in the south of the borough, it's a much higher percentage of white middle class. And if we were to take a local area within the Northwest, for example, Bensham Manor, we'll find that there's 92% of households who have a deficiency of access to nature. And that maps onto a huge difference in life expectancy. In the north of the borough, the life expectancy for males is 10.6 years lower than the south of the borough, which has a much larger white population and much larger access and quality of green space. So that feels really striking, a nearly 11-year life expectancy difference. Now, if we look at the map of Croydon from the tree equity score map, you can see the same areas I've just quoted, the northwest of the borough, which is over 70% minority ethnic. We can see here with the orange on the northwest of the borough map, this is for tree equity. So the orange areas have a lower tree equity score. There's less tree canopy cover. We can see that there's a correlation with the general overview for deficiency of access to nature. And in the south of the borough, much more green, much higher level of tree canopy cover, which also correlates to the general picture for having a higher level of quality access to nature. If we look at more deeply into the tree equity score, and I've zoomed into one of the orange areas in the northwest of the Croydon borough here. This is a borough, a local area within Thornton Heath, which is one of the orange areas. And this area has a 79% population of Black and minority ethnic people. And you'll see there a tree equity score of 75 with only 5% coverage, very low coverage of tree canopy cover. And one of the figures here you can see on the tree equity score is heat disparity, just to pick one sort of indicator or one disparity and disadvantage. It's 3.2% higher here than the average, with a very low tree canopy cover of 5%, with 79% of the population being from Black minority ethnic areas. And if we take an example from the south of the borough, this is an area called Sanderstead, which is towards the bottom of the Croydon map that I showed you. Here, there's 100% tree equity score. And in this area, I think there's 34% population of people from Black and minority ethnic groups. So here, actually, their tree canopy cover is at 30%, which is over and above the canopy cover goal of 30%. So really big difference in the picture here. And if we go back to the heat disparity indicator, we see that it's much cooler than the average of 1.32%. So there's a huge amount of rich data that we can draw from this tool that indicates there is a correlation between where people of colour live and there being less access not only to nature in general, but to tree canopy cover specifically. But as we say, we need to do much more research to really drill down to get a good idea of what this relationship is. Where am I for time? I also just want to add in the qualitative picture, the voices of the communities we work with. Hopefully it shouldn't need to be said, but there is a view within the environmental field that one of the reasons people of colour are less present in nature is that it's not important to us, that it's not within our culture, that there's an ignorance about nature, which simply isn't the case. Trees in the natural world are deeply important to us. And some of the views shared when we've had reflective time around the fire to talk about how we feel about the quality and number of trees in the areas where we live. It's an expression of anger and loss that there aren't more trees. The sense that some people get to live near to trees and not others, that there is a discrimination in that. There's a sense of injustice, unfairness, and they perceive race and class as being a determiner of who gets to live near trees. And indeed, when trees are greens, people have experienced that there's a process of greenification, that it changes who moves into the area, that we see gentrification. People would love to be more involved with tree planting, but find they're often sort of perhaps tapped into projects right at the last stage where they're asked to water them sort of as an afterthought. People would love to have a sense of an ownership and participation in conceiving projects, and also want to feel empowered to plant trees and to advocate for tree planting without waiting for someone else to do it or for the permission. So just to put front and centre that trees matter to people of colour, and we want to be part of movements and not sort of an adjacent or last minute thought in the process of developing schemes for tree planting. So I'm going to end there. Thanks very much for listening and for your time.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, Beth. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And it's been, yeah, just great to work with you and kind of learn from you and the work that Wild in the City are doing and have been doing. So we're now, if you could make Katie the host, Beth, and then we'll, oh, I can't hear you. And if we pass over, yep. So Katie, you're now the host. So we'll have a bit of time for questions at the end. So do pop your questions in the chat and we can come back to Beth and Mark and just pick up on some of the things that we've sort of started to touch on there. But firstly, over to Katie Hawkins from the absolutely fabulous organisation Birmingham Tree People.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the amazing talks, Beth and Mark. They're brilliant, really fascinating. So my name's Katie Hawkins. I work as Engagement Officer for Birmingham Tree People, and I was specifically brought on last year to work on the Urban Forest Accelerator programme, which is being held by National Trust with the involvement of Woodland Trust and others, which is how I met Adam. The Urban Forest Accelerator programme aims to explore how we can equitably develop with a view to share urban forests so that they better serve all people, and that we can bring the many benefits that trees bring more equitably in cities to all people. So my role was engagement worker to explore how we can work with people in neighbourhoods selected for having low canopy cover at all stages of tree establishment, to include deciding what gets planted where and how, and being involved in developing aftercare strategies as well. So before I talk about the projects in a bit more detail, because I'm just going to run through with you what happened, I just wanted to say a bit about Birmingham Tree People. They are a charity based in Birmingham, and they aim to support residents, care for and manage the urban forests in the city. So that includes running monthly free training programmes, running an accredited arboriculture course, running tree identification walks, and also hosting a number of citizen science projects, including one auditing newly planted street trees. They look to work alongside the City Council to sort of supplement what the tree officers do. The tree officers in Birmingham mostly are doing audits and surveys, felling where needed, and doing maintenance work. So we aim to do the education side of things and also planting new trees. Birmingham Tree People were also involved in the development of the master plan for Birmingham, which I think was the first urban forest master plan in the UK, and it does lay out addressing tree equity as a priority in this plan. They're also involved in getting tree plotter for the city, which shows tree equity, as we can see here. The divide in Birmingham is really stark, in wards ranging from 13% canopy cover to 49%. The tree plotter tool also allows you to see various environmental justice data, air quality, urban heat island effect, flooding, and so on. And also it works as a data management tool, so we can see information about the different trees we have. Well, it's important to note this is trees we manage our street trees, and to include the other trees owned by the City Council. You can see information about the tree type and the health of the trees and lots of other information. So when I came into this role, the neighbourhoods we were going to be working in had already been decided: Nechells, and then Hodge Hill and Bromford. They were decided for having low canopy cover and also for scoring highly on environmental justice mapping data. And they also were chosen for aligning to general city strategies and planning going forward. It was also decided that we're going to be planting on housing land, wanting to bring environmental services directly to people. And I was passed over a number of maps showing potential planting spaces in these different neighbourhoods, outlined by an amazing tree officer who's no longer with Birmingham City Council, Andy Ellison, who was kind of going above and beyond. And he, so I received all these maps showing potentially good planting spots. There was at least triple the amount of potential spots for as there were trees to plant. It's 44 in total. So it was proposed to me that an early task would be to think about where might make the most sense, wanting the trees to thrive and live long lives. So thinking about maybe planting near to organisations that might want to take a role in caring for them, planting them, being involved in everything. That we also want to consider the nature of the spaces, how they're currently used, what are the opportunities and also risks associated with different spaces. And also, of course, looking at the tree plotter data and thinking about equity disparities within neighbourhoods. So my first thing that I wanted to do was to get out and start meeting people and meet those organisations with overlapping values that we might want to work with. And also to find out more about the trees that are already in neighbourhoods, like who do we already have? What are the relationships people have with them? What are the diverse ways that they know and appreciate their local trees? And to start from that point. My background, this is my first planting season. I've worked with trees for quite a long time, but not planting. And my background is in kind of place responsive community arts and working through methods of co-production and asset-based community development. So that was how I went about this piece of work. So so I got out to the neighbourhoods, meeting kind of community leaders, local councillors, the tree officers, finding out about these different spaces that we might plant in, how they're used, learning, for example, that some are important football playing sites, we definitely wouldn't want to plant there, or where Eid is hosted every year, and there's importance in keeping that green space clear of trees. So learning about places where we wouldn't want to plant. Also learning about, I don't know, local particularities. One neighbourhood, there's an overabundance of black locusts, as the tree officer really liked them. Or learning about a rowan that was ceremoniously that was planted for a community member who'd sadly passed. Overhanging branches that were leading to people feeling unsafe, so kind of moments where the existing trees weren't being managed well enough and that was causing problems. And then also other trees that people really appreciated. And also through that process, just got to know about the groups I should meet with, people who really had strong connections with trees in the neighbourhood that I might meet with. So yeah, went out joining all the local walking groups, meeting residents on a one-to-one basis as well, adding 2 trees, attending Friends of Parks group meetings and trying to get beyond the community facilitation layer and meeting people who maybe don't normally get involved in organising, but have those strong relationships to trees and wanted to kind of shape everything with me. So yeah, and I tried to hot desk from the neighbourhoods and just kind of get within them. I live in Birmingham myself, so yeah, just trying to be there as much as I could. And yeah, met some really amazing people, and that's where it all started. So yeah, the first round of events, pre-planting engagement, was going to all be around celebrating and noticing the trees we already had, as it felt important to do that before welcoming in new trees. First, kind of thinking who's already there and how do we connect to them. So organised a few different events, working with different residents and organisations. This was a really beautiful, kind of mindful, creative walk that I developed with Lisa, who's a local resident. And focus on kind of wellbeing and mental health here. And she hosted some beautiful meditations, and then we had various creative prompts to connect to different trees, as us listening to silver birch on the left, and then an impromptu ritual for ash dieback, some ash trees that had dieback sadly, giving some energy to them, and poems made of similes and metaphors relating to trees. And yeah, it's really beautiful. Then this was an event developed with partners in Neutrals. This was more fun, children-based, enjoying colours of trees and some sensory kind of play. And they had disposable cameras and were taking photos of trees they appreciated. So yeah, the buttery yellow, beautiful ginkgo there. And these events also aim to provide an opportunity to have more thoughtful, intimate conversations around what trees we'd like to welcome in to neighbourhoods. We were able to give a short list of sorts and did research in advance to inform that. So we kind of used a number of different sources. Our tree class map, which can tell you the makeup of the existing tree stock in the area, but as mentioned, that's just the Kia street trees, and can run analysis thinking about the 10, 20, 30 rule, whereby, as I'm sure lots of you know, you don't want 10% of a particular species, 20% of a genus and 30% of a family. So keeping that in mind. And then also Andy Allison, who I mentioned, also gave a short list of trees that he'd suggest. He works at the council. We've also, Birmingham Tree people have done a brilliant audit of the newly planted street trees, which shows that sweet gum, for example, is very successful. So we had some other like research data to call upon to help inform decision making. So we had these shortlists, and of all the different kind of microsites we planted in, there was varying levels of involvement around decision making. Sorry, someone's just on the way to me. Various levels of involvement in terms of deciding what we plant where. And this piece of work was very time constrained for me coming into post. Those 4.5 months until all the planting had to be done, and I was working part-time, so we did what we could do. And on the left, that was an example of a really nice example of people being involved in deciding. It was in someone's lounge, a community leader who hosted us after the mindful walk, and we really sat around and talked about the different trees we might plant, and thought about their different qualities, from environmental qualities to symbolic to colour to everything, and through consensus kind of decided that we wanted a sweet gum. In other cases it was more light touch. We also tried doing postal votes. We were working in a sheltered housing unit, and the neighbourhood officer said that we probably shouldn't try and do something in person, but instead doing a postal vote might work. So we sent round to all the residents saying, which tree would you prefer, with some information. So we're just exploring different ways to involve people. And this was it. The Urban Forest Accelerator with Birmingham is a case study, is very much an action research project. So thinking what we can learn and what works and what doesn't. Also then, in terms of deciding where we planted, again, different levels of engagement. In one neighbourhood, Bromford, the organisation I work with were really keen to plant in order to encourage or to enhance the green route running through the estate. So a lot of the preliminary work we did was mapping out the existing substantial trees and then thinking about how we might plant in order to fill in the gaps, to make a kind of line running through. So there was a lot of involvement there, and we also wanted to plant outside residents' houses who wanted to play a long-term role in the care of the trees. So and then sometimes it was simply like not to plant on the football areas, and that was the input. So yeah, varying levels. And then we were working towards planting days, continuing with all the themes that were kind of unearthed through these previous stages, and working with all the people that we built partnerships with that at this point felt really good. So here's the event that carried on from the mindful walk, with Lisa running a beautiful body scan around the just then dug hole that about 30 of us had all dug together. And my favorite thing was when she was doing the body scan, we got up to our kind of middles, which she referred to as our trunk, and then invited us to think about the incoming trunk of the tree that was coming to the land. And it was really poetic and beautiful, and yeah, lots of spontaneous well wishes towards the tree afterwards, people naming it, which happened a lot, and yeah, it felt like a really meaningful day. And we also gave everyone a little on the right you can see these little scrolls. It was a tree meditation and then an invitation to take care and how you might do that. And here's Neutrals event, the Neutrals planting day. more children focused again, playful. Chantel, who was our wonderful partner, who is a worker at the Pod, which is community centre, and also lives in Nechells, really shaped this and had the idea that we might make decorations on the day, but also make some after, composed of photographs taken on the day, specifically of children involved, so that they might be encouraged to go back to the trees to see if their decoration was there or their photo was there, and to sort of like further create that link between them and the tree. There's also some really nice, beautiful moments before planting where we were looking for worms and noticing all the different colours of the stones and the granularity of the soil, and just some softness. That was really lovely. And again, here's just another planting event. It was close to Christmas, so dressing the tree. Amazing Agatha, who takes a lot of photographs of the trees locally and really appreciates them. She brought along a poem to share, which was really lovely. And on the left, you can see it was always a different team that turned up, a different group of tree officers, or the Woodland team or Parks team. And we got a lot of good feedback that it was kind of nice that they were able to be part of more community-focused planting. And it was a very nice day. Sometimes less people turned up when we didn't have that strong anchor organisation who have kind of really like brilliant community ethic and are really embedded and calling people to attend and really doing amazing work. Here's the sheltered housing unit event. No one turned up, but we did go around and knock on everyone's doors, and eventually someone came out who is brilliant and is wanting to take care of the tree going forward. So doing a little ceremonial sprinkle there. And here I mentioned the Bromford estate when we were trying to plant this line of trees going through, and trying to plant directly outside residents' houses who wanted to be involved in the trees, like long-term care. So this is Hazel and Barry. We planted directly outside of their houses, and then had some more like public celebratory planting with musical instruments and lots of percussion. For people who are involved in the planting, I've loved that noise of the metal instrument that you put on top of the stakes and you bang in. It's very musical, so we're sort of playing music on top of that, which is nice to what's the word, play with the civic arboriculture sounds. That's not what I'm to say, but Joe on the right's pretending to be a tree, and I really love loads of people pretending to be trees throughout the planting, and it was a really nice impulse. So now we're working on the kind of aftercare, and again co-producing all the activity with local partners. We hosted a decorate a watering can session the other day, and then all walked out to water the trees, and it felt powerful to walk through that process together. I don't think those black tubes that poke out are that obvious, or they're not necessarily inviting. So we do have some of those water me tags, but not on all the trees. So that was really nice, and I've got loads more events planned with different partners. A tree care event built with Lisa, again thinking about two-way care, the care that trees give us and the care we might give them, and other exciting things, doing some improv sessions with children, which is looking at trees and also asthma awareness. We've launched a poster competition, designing posters to encourage people to water the trees, picnics, storytelling under trees, lots of things. And I guess another part of the ongoing relationship or the aftercare is being in touch with people, receiving texts and then brilliant photographs of how the trees are doing, and also messages where people are concerned that the tree's not doing well or the gator bag isn't appropriately fixed onto the tree, which is really brilliant to get those as well. This was my favorite email. It's the before and the after of the tree, and the line in the email said, "Our baby's doing well." So that was really nice. So I just wanted to end on a couple of like reflections. I guess as always, you want more time and more capacity. If we could have done it again and going forward, I'd have loved to do some data analysis with residents, so looking at the tree plotter map together, and thinking through from that earlier stage, because I recognise we sort of jumped, but capacity, unfortunately. Also, whilst it's great to receive those maps of potential planting spots, of course that limited it from the off, and people sort of, it was a very constrained choice, or a fairly constrained choice. I say that, although it did actually feel quite open. Anyway, we are looking to implement this for the next neighbourhood we work in. Birmingham City Council, maybe lots of you know, is a very constrained local authority right now, so that did make things a little bit tricky. However, part of what the Urban Forest Accelerator programme wants to do is explore how charities such as Birmingham Tree People can work with under-resourced councils, so learning to be had. And just the shout out to all the amazing organisations we work with, and we wouldn't have been successful without them and their brilliant ongoing community development work. So, and their generous way of welcoming us in, wanting to draw a resource for their residents. And some successes, I think I've outlined some just now, but always think co-production and starting with people as early as possible, as you were saying, Beth, as well. For me, it's really important to welcome in the holistic ways people know and connect to trees, and I think that showed up, and so felt like there was quite a lot of magic in the events, and that was great. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Katie. That was wonderful. And it's really inspiring looking at the work you've been doing, and, you know, been privileged to have a good front row seat for some of that through the Urban Forest Accelerator project that we've been working on together in Birmingham. So thank you. So I have just popped a message in chat. So if anyone has any questions, then please we haven't got the webinar functionality, so we're not going to be able to kind of just look at a Q&A panel. So I think if someone has a question, you could probably put your hand up. That would probably work too, and we can come to you. Or just put it in the chat and we'll try and read it out. I think there's one or two people who aren't on mute. Possibly you, Rob. If you could pop your phone or iPad or computer on mute, that'd be great. And then we can unmute, you can kind of unmute if you'd like to talk or ask any questions. So we'll just give it a minute and see if anyone has anything they want to ask. There's some interesting comments back up here in our chat about, and Beth, you mentioned like one of the things we're just about to do some work on is this project with the University of Exeter. So we're going to try and move some of the analysis that we've done through the Tree Equity Score project into peer-reviewed science, really, to try and start establishing some consensus on what some of these national patterns are. We've done some analysis with the GIS team at American Forests, as you were showing. It's shown, really big disparities that are sort of systemic and repeated all around the UK, really, wherever you look. But I really feel like we need to move those into some peer-reviewed science so we can start building on that. So watch this space for the results of that, because we're hopefully going to be starting that very soon. Katie, do you want to just do a quick plug for the event that you're running on Thursday, because you're doing a walk as part of the Urban Tree Festival, aren't you?
Yes, we're doing a walk around Neachills, one of the neighbourhoods that I mentioned, and we're being hosted by the Pod, who are the main organisation we work with. So it will be a walking tour, kind of a bit more of a how-to and sharing what we learned, plus a lot of what I shared this evening, and maybe trying to bring a bit of a flavour of the process to the event. So maybe some poems and things.
All right. Okay. So we're getting a few questions in. So we'll do Phoebe's question first, then come to you, David, with your hand. So Phoebe's question, which I think any of you could answer, would be about the trees you're choosing to plant and climate change. So is climate change driving decisions about the kind of species? Katie, I was struck by the kind of, the way I think you've had a really sort of inclusive approach in terms of getting people to choose the trees they're planting and offering people sort of choices. So does climate play a role in the kind of choices of species you're giving people?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that research was, well, held partly by the nurseries, and so they're doing a lot of that research and then stocking trees that would be appropriate, was what I was told. But also the suggestions from Andy Allison as well were informed by this kind of thinking as well. So yes, that was at the top of our list. Climate, and then generally just getting the right tree for the right place, and taking into account 10, 20, 30 and wanting to add to the biodiversity of the area. So yeah.
Great. Okay, so I think we'll now come to you, David, and then we'll do Ian your question. So go for it, David.
Hi. Yeah, thanks. They're like three really very insightful and inspiring talks. My question was for you mentioned that you didn't feel like they mapped over onto each other to the extent that they are in the US, and because I wanted to ask a question about whether you felt like tools like Tree Equity Score were an opportunity to sort of advocate and build a movement around that.
Absolutely, yeah, and we had a robust discussion about how data on ethnicity and race was going to be represented in the tool, and I think that the choice we made was to develop an evidence base, because American Forests saw it as a scientific tool and really wanted to honour that with the UK version. So hence doing some primary research to really establish the evidence base, and then to consider that being one of the indices in a future version of the tool, where currently it's a layer, so you can interrogate based on race and ethnicity, but it isn't included as one of the main indices.
Thanks. I think my internet dropped at the end as well, but I was trying to ask about as well about what sort of potential you saw. Sorry, Adam, I'm just taking advantage of having the microphone now. What like sort of opportunity you could see from the tool as like a tool for movement building around that, like overlapping of the two?
I think this is going to be a real game changer in inspiring people who haven't so far been part of the conversation around climate impacts, access to nature, because I think people can really see what they're missing by using this tool. They can go in and see the evidence of, I don't have this, and the impact of that is whether you want to consider the psychological, the physical, the economic, the social, and I think it will really empower people and galvanize people. And I think it will place tree equity and environmental justice on the list of other injustices that people are having to fight and challenge in urban areas, like knife crime and drugs. I think tree equity and access to things that make our cities safer, more pleasant places to live in. This is really going to be a way of bringing that to a wider consciousness. I think there will be a lot of people that don't currently realise that they are disadvantaged by lack of access to trees, and this will help us tell the story and raise awareness.
Thanks.
Thanks, Beth. So I'm going to ask a question that's been asked by Ian, which is about, so you mentioned, I think, Mark, the fact that you'd been inspired by the Los Angeles tree people originally back in the 1980s, and in Birmingham we have the Birmingham version of that. So what does any of our speakers think about this model of the sort of third sector taking on the roles that have historically been done by local authorities? So
Can I answer that? I think it has a lot of potential, but I think we also need to be aware of some of the pitfalls of it as well. I was just trying to remember, what was that initiative of David Cameron some years ago? Was it Big Society or something? Whereby, we had the idea of, local groups taking over and managing parks. It wasn't thought out well at all. Going back to the original model in Los Angeles in terms of trees, tree people always worked very closely with the Los Angeles tree sections, and it was a true partnership. But of course, the local authority has the statutory responsibility, and that doesn't change unless we make some real radical changes to how local services are managed. There is a big role for the third sector and many things that they can do and the experiences that they can bring. So yes, I'm very much in favor of it, but it does need to be done properly, and it does need to be thought through, and it mustn't be an excuse for cutting the spending that you allocate to the urban forest. and people seen as just cheap voluntary labour. It needs to be done properly, but yes, when it is done properly, it has huge potential.
Thanks, Mark. Any reflections from you, Katie? Because obviously in your photographs you were sort of showing us it looks like the council are working sort of side by side with Birmingham Tree people.
Yeah, I'd say one good thing is not being part of Birmingham City Council and being separate. I guess I'm freer from associations people have with the council, and just seem maybe appear as a bit more neutral. And yeah, it was good to work with different departments and involve them. The tree officers in the city, unfortunately for them, I feel for them, they often they encounter the public when complaints are submitted and there are problems, so eventually have a bit of a warped view of things. So I guess I was lucky that I was able to participate in the more celebratory side of things, although it included all elements. But so yeah, I tried to feedback what I'm hearing to them and try and share. And some of the tree officers came along, which is really brilliant. And yeah, I think it's like a work in progress. So yes.
Right, yeah, it looked like the tree officers were attending some of the planting events from certainly from the photographs anyway.
Well, it was all different departments. It was like the parks, woodland, tree officers, so it was a mix. It was yeah.
Right, and I think one of the things we've reflected on in the Urban Forest Accelerator project, which we'll be writing up some of this work and sort of making it available more widely later in the year, is that idea of statutory obligations. You know, we've talked a lot about the obligations for risk and sort of public safety that comes into play in terms of local authorities and trees. There's probably another dimension to that, which is about provision of adequate levels of tree canopy cover for kind of public health and climate resilience that isn't yet, someone might be able to correct me if I've got that wrong in the chat, a statutory obligation, you know, but I think it's, you know, if our kind of predictions on climate are right, you know, we are going to need to find ways to say, you know, make cities much safer in terms of provision of things like shade and tree canopy cover. So, you know, that's an idea that I think we're starting to explore in the Urban Forest Accelerator project, and also how that might move us a bit beyond the simplistic metrics of trees planted in urban areas, where we know that a single tree planted can do so much good for so many people. The measurement of one tree feels really wholly inadequate, and we need a kind of, you know, maybe a better way to talk about the benefits of trees to people.